Look who decided to show up. It's our favorite black sheep. My cousin Derek's voice boomed across my uncle's backyard, where 43 members of the Morrison family had gathered to celebrate what we didn't know would be Grandpa William's last birthday party. The laughter that followed was sharp and familiar, the kind that comes from years of family members using humor to mask their disappointment in the relative who never quite fit the mold. I stood by the dessert table, holding a paper plate of cake I suddenly had no appetite for, watching my cousins share knowing looks about the family disappointment who dared to attend their celebration. What they didn't realize was that while they'd been measuring their worth through Grandpa's approval, he'd been quietly watching all of us, taking notes on character that would matter far more than anyone imagined. 3 months later, sitting in Attorney Margaret Chen's office as she read aloud the most shocking will in Morrison family history, I realized that sometimes being the black sheep just means you're the only one brave enough to be authentic, while everyone else performs for an inheritance. Drop a comment if you've ever been the family member who chose honesty over approval. This story's about the moment when authenticity finally gets the recognition it deserves. My name is Sarah Morrison, I'm 33 years old, and I've spent my entire adult life being dismissed as the family disappointment while my cousins competed for the title of most devoted grandchild. What they saw as my stubborn independence, Grandpa William apparently recognized as the character trait he valued most in the world. The Morrison family had built its identity around a patriarch, whose approval was both the ultimate prize and the driving force behind every family decision, for 3 generations. My grandfather, William Morrison, had started with nothing in 1962, and built Morrison Construction into a $50 million empire that employed half the family and defined our entire social structure. Grandpa's success story was legendary within our family, immigrating from Ireland at 19 with $47 in his pocket, working construction jobs while learning English at night, saving every penny to start his own company, and eventually becoming one of the most respected contractors in the Pacific Northwest. His rise from poverty to wealth was the foundation myth that shaped every family conversation and expectation. More importantly, Grandpa's approval was the currency that determined family hierarchy, Christmas gift distribution, inclusion in business decisions, and ultimately, everyone assumed, inheritance distribution when he passed away. For 30 years, my cousins had been competing for his attention, his praise, and his investment in their futures. This competition had created a family dynamic where success was measured by Grandpa's recognition, rather than individual accomplishment, and where family members tailored their personalities, career choices, and life decisions to maximize air standing in his eyes. My cousin Derek, 36, had positioned himself as the heir apparent by joining Morrison Construction immediately after high school, working his way up from general laborer to project supervisor while living in the apartment above Grandpa's garage and maintaining daily contact that bordered on obsession. His entire identity centered around being William Morrison's most devoted grandson, and he'd never made a major life decision without first securing Grandpa's approval. My cousin Jennifer, 34, had earned favorite granddaughter status by majoring in business administration, specifically to help modernize Morrison Construction's administrative systems, then moving back to her hometown after college to work as Grandpa's personal assistant and office manager at Darrow. She'd postponed marriage, delayed having children, and structured her entire adult life around being available for whatever Grandpa needed whenever he needed it. My cousin Michael, 31st, had chosen accounting as his career path, specifically because Grandpa had mentioned wanting family members who understood financial management. He'd spent 5 years working for a large firm to gain experience, then joined Morrison Construction as chief financial officer while living in the house next door to Grandpa's property. My cousin Lisa, 29, had become a teacher because Grandpa valued education, then spent her summers working in Morrison Construction's office, and her weekends helping Grandpa with personal projects around his property. She'd organized family gatherings, coordinated holiday celebrations, and appointed herself as the family historian, who documented every milestone in Grandpa's business and personal life. Then there was me, the granddaughter who had chosen a completely different path that seemed designed to disappoint the family patriarch and distance myself from Morrison Construction's sphere of influence. I'd graduated from Oregon State with a degree in environmental science, a field that Grandpa viewed with suspicion, because environmental regulations had complicated several of his construction projects over the years. While my cousins were learning about concrete, steel, and project management, I was studying ecosystem restoration, pollution control, and sustainable development practices that Grandpa considered obstacles to practical business operations. After college, I'd moved to Portland to work for the Environmental Protection Agency, a government position that Grandpa viewed as bureaucratic interference with private enterprise. My job involved reviewing construction projects for environmental compliance, which meant I was professionally involved in exactly the kind of regulatory oversight that Morrison Construction had to navigate. "Sarah works for the EPA," became Grandpa's standard introduction when people asked about his grandchildren. "She's on the other side of the table from us, making sure construction companies follow all the environmental rules." The characterization wasn't entirely accurate. My work involved helping companies understand regulations rather than punishing them for violations, but it established my role as the family member whose career interests conflicted with Morrison Construction's business objectives. More problematically, I'd never shown interest in joining the family business, never asked Grandpa for career advice, and never structured my life around maintaining his approval or securing my position in the family hierarchy. While my cousins visited Grandpa weekly and called him daily, I maintained a normal relationship that involved holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, and occasional phone conversations that didn't require his constant validation. This independence had been interpreted as indifference by family members who couldn't understand why anyone would choose professional autonomy over the security and status that came with being part of Morrison Construction's inner circle. "Sarah's always been different," became the family's standard explanation for my career choices and lifestyle decisions. "She's never really fit in with the family business or understood what Grandpa built for all of us." The black sheep label had started during my college years, when I'd majored in environmental science despite Grandpa's suggestions that business administration would be more practical for someone who might eventually join Morrison Construction. The label had solidified during my early career, when I'd turned down Grandpa's offers to create a position for me within the company that would utilize my environmental expertise. "Every family has a black sheep," Derek would joke during family gatherings where my cousins discussed their roles in Morrison Construction, while I talked about EPA projects that had nothing to do with the family business. "Sarah's ours, and we love her anyway." The joke had become increasingly pointed over the years, especially during family celebrations where my cousins' contributions to Grandpa's business were recognized and celebrated, while my environmental career was treated as an interesting hobby that had no relevance to family priorities. But what my cousins interpreted as rebellion or indifference was actually something much simpler. I'd never needed Grandpa's approval to feel valuable or successful, and I'd never viewed Morrison Construction as the only path to meaningful work or financial security. This independence had allowed me to build a career based on my own interests and values rather than family expectations, but it had also positioned me as the family outsider who didn't understand or appreciate the opportunities that Grandpa had created for his descendants. The dynamic reached its peak during family celebrations where my cousins' achievements within Morrison Construction were highlighted and celebrated while my EPA career was acknowledged politely but dismissively. "Derek just landed the Millfield Shopping Center contract," Grandpa would announce during birthday dinners or holiday gatherings. "Biggest project in Morrison Construction history. I'm proud of the work he's doing to build on what we started." Jennifer implemented new software systems that increased our administrative efficiency by 30%. He'd continue, beaming with pride at granddaughter who had dedicated her career to supporting his business vision. "Michael's financial management helped us navigate the recession without laying off any employees," he'd add, recognizing the grandson who had chosen accounting specifically to contribute to family business stability. "And Lisa's been documenting our family history for a book she's writing about Morrison Construction's impact on the community," he'd conclude, acknowledging the granddaughter who had made family legacy her personal mission. When it came time to mention my achievements, Grandpa's tone would shift to polite acknowledgement rather than genuine pride. "Sarah's doing well with her environmental work," he'd say without elaborating on specific accomplishments or expressing enthusiasm for my career trajectory. Very different from construction, but important work in its own way. The contrast was subtle but unmistakable, and it reinforced my position as the family member whose success existed outside the Morrison Construction universe, and therefore didn't contribute to the family's collective achievement or legacy. This dynamic had continued for over a decade, with my cousins deepening their involvement in Grandpa's business, while I built an independent career that had no connection to family enterprises or expectations. By the time I turned 33, Derek had become Morrison Construction's vice president of operations with an annual salary of $185,000 and a company truck that he drove to family gatherings. Jennifer had been promoted to executive assistant with responsibility for Grandpa's personal and business affairs, plus a company credit card for expenses related to family coordination. Michael's role as CFO included profit-sharing arrangements that had made him financially comfortable enough to purchase a house 3 blocks from Grandpa's property. Lisa's dedication to family documentation had earned her a part-time consulting position with Morrison Construction to manage their marketing and public relations, plus funding for the family history book she'd been researching for 5 years. Meanwhile, I'd been promoted to senior environmental specialist with the EPA, earning a respectable but modest government salary while working on projects that had no connection to Morrison Construction or family business interests. My career achievements were meaningful to me personally and professionally, but they didn't contribute to the family's wealth, status, or collective success story. The contrast between my independent career path and my cousin's family-integrated professional lives had become more pronounced over the years, especially during family celebrations where business achievements were celebrated, and my work was politely ignored. But the most painful aspect of being the family black sheep wasn't the professional dismissal, it was the assumption that my independence represented ingratitude for the opportunities that Grandpa had created, and rejection of the values that had defined Morrison family success for 3 generations. Sarah never appreciated what Grandpa built for all of us, I'd overheard Derek telling his wife during one family gathering. She acts like she's too good for the family business. It's sad that she chose government work over family loyalty, Jennifer had added during a conversation she thought I couldn't hear. Grandpa gave all of us opportunities to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and she walked away from it. The characterization hurt because it misrepresented both my motivations and my relationship with Grandpa. I hadn't rejected family business opportunities because I was ungrateful or thought I was superior. I'd pursued environmental science because it matched my interests and values, and I'd built an independent career because I wanted to create something through my own efforts, rather than inherit success through family connections. But explaining authentic motivation to family members who had structured their entire lives around seeking patriarchal approval felt futile, especially when my independence was interpreted as rejection of family bonds rather than expression of individual identity. The tensions came to a head during Grandpa's 87th birthday party last summer, a celebration that would turn out to be his final birthday and the last family gathering before his death 3 months later. The party was held at Grandpa's house, with 43 family members gathering to celebrate the patriarch, whose business success had defined 3 generations of Morrison family identity. Derek had organized the event with Jennifer's help, Michael had handled the catering arrangements, and Lisa had created a photo display documenting Grandpa's life achievements and family legacy. I'd attended the party as I attended all family celebrations, with genuine affection for Grandpa and appreciation for family relationships, but without the performative devotion that my cousins displayed during every interaction with the family patriarch. The difference in our approaches became apparent during the gift-giving portion of the celebration, when my cousins presented Grandpa with elaborate tokens of appreciation that reflected their ongoing competition for his favor. Derek had commissioned a custom painting of Morrison Construction's headquarters building, complete with a plaque recognizing Grandpa's visionary leadership in building a family legacy. Jennifer had created a leather-bound scrapbook documenting every Morrison Construction project from 1962 to the present, with personal notes about Grandpa's role in each achievement. Michael had arranged for a financial analysis showing how Morrison Construction had outperformed industry averages in every decade of operation, presented in a professional binder that highlighted Grandpa's business acumen. Lisa had written and privately published a short biography of Grandpa's immigration story and business development, complete with historical photos and interviews with longtime employees. When it came time for my gift presentation, I offered something much simpler: a framed photograph of Grandpa and me from my EPA graduation ceremony, where he'd been one of the few family members who had traveled to Portland to attend my achievement celebration. I wanted to give you something that represented our relationship, I'd explained while presenting the gift. This photo reminds me of how proud you looked when I graduated, even though environmental science wasn't the career path you would have chosen for me. The gift was personal and meaningful to me, representing one of the few times when DPI had celebrated my individual achievement, rather than measuring it against family business priorities. But compared to my cousin's elaborate tributes to his business success and family leadership, My simple photograph seemed inadequate and poorly thought out. "That's lovely, Sarah," Grandpa had said while examining the framed photo. "I remember that day. You worked hard for that degree." But his response had been polite rather than enthusiastic, and I could see my cousins exchanging glances that suggested my gift confirmed their assessment of me as a family member who didn't understand the significance of the significance, the occasion, or the appropriate way to honor family patriarch. The black sheep comment had come later in the evening, during the informal socializing that followed dinner, when Derek had been holding court with several younger cousins while discussing Morrison Construction's future plans and family business opportunities. "Look who decided to show up, it's our favorite black sheep," he'd announced when I'd approached the dessert table where they were gathered. "Sarah, we were just talking about family business opportunities. Want to hear about real careers instead of government bureaucracy?" The laughter that followed had been sharp and knowing, the kind that established insider group dynamics, while excluding the person who didn't fit the established family narrative. "Derek, I'm happy with my EPA career," I'd replied, trying to maintain dignity while processing the casual cruelty of being mocked at a family celebration. "Of course you are," Jennifer had added with false sweetness. "Someone has to be the family rebel who refuses all of Grandpa's generous offers. Every family needs a black sheep," Michael had chimed in, repeating the joke that had followed me for over a decade. "Sarah's ours and it keeps life interesting." The comments had continued for several minutes, with my cousins treating my career choices and independent lifestyle as entertainment for family members who understood real success and family loyalty. I'd endured the mockery with as much grace as possible, but the experience had been deeply painful and isolating. What hurt most wasn't the criticism of my career or lifestyle choices, it was the assumption that my independence represented ingratitude for family opportunities and rejection of family bonds that had sustained Morrison's success for 3 generations. But 3 months later, when Grandpa died suddenly from a heart attack while reviewing construction plans in his home office, our family dynamics would be transformed by revelations that none of us had anticipated. The funeral was attended by over 300 people, including Morrison Construction employees, business associates, community leaders, and family members who had traveled from across the country to pay respects to the patriarch whose success had defined our family identity. Derek delivered the main eulogy, focusing on Grandpa's business achievements and the family legacy he'd created through Morrison Construction. Jennifer organized the reception and memorial displays. Michael handled the financial aspects of funeral arrangements. Lisa documented everything for the family history she'd been compiling. I attended as a grieving granddaughter who had loved Grandpa despite our different perspectives on career success and family obligation. My role in the funeral proceedings was minimal, reflecting my position as the family member whose relationship with Grandpa had been genuine but not central to his business legacy or family leadership. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral, allowing time for grief processing and family coordination before addressing the legal and financial aspects of Grandpa's estate distribution. Everyone assumed the will would reflect the family hierarchy that had been established through decades of competition for Grandpa's approval, with Derek receiving the largest inheritance due to his role as business successor, Jennifer receiving significant assets due to her personal service, and Michael and Lisa receiving substantial but smaller portions based on their family business contributions. I expected to receive a modest inheritance that reflected my position as the loved but disappointing granddaughter who had chosen independence over family business involvement. The reading was held at T. Margaret Chen's law office, with all 4 grandchildren present along with our parents and Grandpa's business partners, who were named in various provisions of the will. William Morrison left very specific instructions about his estate distribution and his reasoning for each decision, Attorney Margaret Chen announced as we gathered in her conference room. He wanted me to read his explanations in his own words, so you'll understand his thinking about family, business, and the qualities he valued most in his descendants. She began with smaller bequests to employees, charitable organizations, and community groups that had been important to Grandpa throughout his life. Then she moved to family members, starting with my parents and aunts and uncles who received generous but expected inheritances that reflected their roles as Grandpa's children. Now we come to the distribution among William's grandchildren, Margaret continued, opening the section of the will that everyone assumed would confirm the family hierarchy that had been established through years of competition for patriarchal approval. To my grandson, Derek Morrison, she read, I leave $50,000 and my gratitude for his dedication to Morrison Construction. Derek worked hard to prove himself worthy of inheritance, but his constant need for my approval revealed a character flaw that would make him a poor leader for the company I built. The conference room went silent. Derek's face drained of color as he processed the devastating assessment of his lifelong campaign to earn Grandpa's favor. To my granddaughter Jennifer Morrison, Margaret continued, I leave $50,000 in recognition for her loyalty and service. Jennifer sacrificed her own development to support my needs, but her willingness to abandon her personal goals for my convenience showed a lack of backbone that concerns me about her future. Jennifer's mouth fell open in shock. The assessment was accurate but cruel, reflecting Grandpa's recognition that her devoted service had come at the cost of individual development and independence. To my grandson Michael Morrison, I leave $50,000 and acknowledgement of his financial expertise. Michael chose accounting specifically to contribute to family business, but his calculation of every decision based on my approval revealed a transactional approach to relationships that disappointed me. Michael stared at Margaret in disbelief, his face cycling through emotions as he realized that Grandpa had interpreted his career choices as manipulation rather than dedication. To my granddaughter Lisa Morrison, I leave $50,000 in appreciation for her work documenting our family history. Lisa's efforts to preserve Morrison Construction's legacy were admirable, but her focus on the past rather than the future showed a limited vision that wouldn't serve our family business well. Lisa had started crying quietly, overwhelmed by the realization that Grandpa had viewed her historical documentation as backward-looking rather than valuable family service. To my granddaughter Sarah Morrison, Margaret continued, her voice carrying surprise at what she was reading, I leave the remaining balance of my estate, including Morrison Construction, all business assets, real estate holdings, and personal property totaling approximately $47 million. The conference room erupted in chaos. My cousins began talking simultaneously, their voices overlapping in confusion, shock, and rising anger about the distribution that had subverted every assumption about family hierarchy and inheritance expectations. But Margaret raised her hand for silence and continued reading Grandpa's explanation. Sarah is the only grandchild who never asked me for anything, never modified her behavior to earn my approval, and never tried to manipulate our relationship for personal gain. She chose her own career path despite my disapproval, built her own success through her own efforts, and maintained our relationship without expecting rewards for her devotion. The room remained silent as Margaret continued with Grandpa's final assessment. Sarah showed me the character trait I value most in the world, authenticity. While her cousins performed for inheritance, Sarah was simply herself. While they competed for my approval, Sarah built her own life according to her own values. While they measured their worth through my recognition, Sarah found meaning through her own achievements. Margaret concluded with Grandpa's final instructions. Sarah has demonstrated the independence, integrity, and backbone necessary to lead Morrison Construction into its next phase. She understands both business operations and environmental compliance, which will be crucial for our industry's future. Most importantly, she has never wanted anything from me, which makes her the person I trust most with everything I built. The silence that followed was complete and devastating. 4 grandchildren who had spent decades competing for patriarchal approval had discovered that the black sheep who had never competed was the one who had earned the ultimate recognition. Derek was the first to find his voice. This is impossible. Sarah doesn't even work for Morrison Construction. She has no business experience. Sarah has 15 years of experience in environmental compliance, which is exactly what construction companies need most, Margaret replied, reading from Grandpa's notes. She also has the integrity and independence necessary to lead a company without being corrupted by power or family politics. Jennifer's shock had turned to anger. Sarah never even pretended to care about the family business. She chose government work over family loyalty. According to Williams' analysis, Sarah chose authenticity over performance, Margaret responded. He believed that her independence demonstrated strength of character rather than family disloyalty. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with my cousins challenging every aspect of Grandpa's decision and demanding explanations for an inheritance distribution that contradicted everything they'd believed about family hierarchy and patriarchal approval. But the will was legally sound and reflected Grandpa's genuine assessment of his grandchildren's character, their suitability for business leadership, and their capacity for handling wealth and responsibility without being corrupted by power, or entitlement. 6 months later, I had transitioned from EPA environmental specialist to CEO of Morrison Construction, bringing environmental compliance expertise to a company that needed modernization and sustainable practices for long-term success. The transition hadn't been easy, requiring intensive learning about construction management, financial oversight, and employee relations that I'd never needed in government work. But Grandpa had been right about my capacity for leadership and my ability to make difficult decisions without being influenced by family politics or personal relationships. More importantly, his assessment of my cousin's character had proven accurate in ways that were both vindicated and heartbreaking. Derek's sense of entitlement and need for constant validation had made him unsuitable for independent leadership. Jennifer's habit of sacrificing personal development for others' approval had left her unprepared for executive responsibility. Michael's transactional approach to relationships had damaged his capacity for inspiring employee loyalty. Lisa's focus on documentation rather than innovation had limited her vision for business development. The inheritance distribution had revealed character traits that had been developed through years of competing for patriarchal approval, rather than building individual competence and integrity. But what surprised me most was discovering how closely Grandpa had been observing all of us, taking notes on character development and leadership potential that he'd never shared with anyone during his lifetime. Among his personal papers, I found detailed assessments of each grandchild's strengths, weaknesses, and suitability for different types of responsibility. His evaluation of my independence and authenticity had been developing for years, based on observations of how I'd handled various situations and challenges without seeking his guidance or approval. "Sarah doesn't need my validation to feel successful," he'd written in notes dated 3 years before his death. "She makes decisions based on her own values rather than family expectations. This authenticity makes her the grandchild most capable of handling wealth and power without being corrupted by either." The recognition was gratifying but also bittersweet, because it revealed how much Grandpa had valued traits in me that I'd never realized he was noticing or appreciating. 2 years later, Morrison Construction has successfully integrated environmental compliance practices that have positioned us ahead of industry regulations, while maintaining profitability and employee satisfaction. The business has grown by 23% under my leadership, and we've received recognition for sustainable construction practices that benefit both clients and community welfare. My cousins have gradually accepted the inheritance distribution and my role as company CEO, though our family relationships required significant rebuilding after the shock and disappointment of discovering that their lifelong competition for our approval had been based on misunderstanding about what Grandpa actually valued in his descendants. Derek has remained with Morrison Construction as a project manager, where his experience and skills contribute to company success without requiring the independent leadership that Grandpa had correctly assessed he wasn't prepared for. Jennifer has developed her own administrative consulting business, finally pursuing personal development rather than supporting others' priorities. Michael has joined a different firm, where his financial expertise is valued without the complications of family politics. Lisa has completed her family history book and is working on historical documentation for other families and businesses. Most importantly, all of us learned that authentic relationships are more valuable than performative devotion, and that character development matters more than approval seeking when it comes to long-term success and meaningful achievement. If you've made it this far, drop authentic in the comments if you understand that sometimes the greatest gift is being yourself, while others are busy trying to be what they think someone else wants. The lesson I learned from inheriting Morrison Construction wasn't about family businesses, wealth management, or patriarchal approval. It was about the difference between seeking validation from others and building character through authentic choices, even when those choices aren't understood or appreciated by people whose opinions matter to you. For decades, I'd been viewed as the family disappointment who had rejected opportunities and chosen independence over family loyalty. But Grandpa had been observing something different. He'd seen character development that came from making authentic choices rather than calculated decisions designed to earn approval. My cousin's competition for his favor had revealed character traits that made them unsuitable for the responsibility they'd been seeking, while my independence had demonstrated exactly the qualities that made me capable of handling wealth, and power without being corrupted by either. The most important realization was that authenticity often looks like rebellion to people who are performing for approval, but it's actually the foundation of character that can handle genuine success and responsibility. Being called the black sheep had been painful because it suggested I didn't belong in my own family. But it also protected me from the character corruption that comes from measuring your worth through other people's approval, rather than our own values and achievements. Tell me about a time when you were criticized for being authentic while others were rewarded for performing. How did you maintain confidence in your choices when family members or colleagues suggested you should be more like everyone else? And what would you say to someone who's struggling with being different in environments that reward conformity?